We are exploring one central idea: transition. A transition that is already underway, driven by environmental realities, by social expectations, by economic pressures, and by the growing awareness that the tourism models of the future cannot simply replicate the patterns of those of the past. We have just heard from the European policy perspective. Now, we turn to a voice that has spent years analyzing these transformations from an academic and research perspective. Our keynote speaker is one of the most recognized researchers examining tourism dynamics in the Mediterranean region. His work focuses on tourism governance, over-tourism, social impacts, territorial justice, and the relationship between tourism development and local communities. Through his research, he has contributed significantly to international debates on how destinations can navigate increasingly complex tourism challenges while protecting both residents' quality of life and environmental sustainability. It is therefore a great pleasure to welcome Mr. Claudio Milano on stage. He's a researcher at the University of Barcelona. In his keynote address, Tourism Transition in the Mediterranean, he will reflect on the structural limits of current tourism models and explore pathways towards more resilient, equitable, and sustainable futures. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning to all. Thank you so much to the Provincial Barcelona Council, to the CCCB, to all of you that are here, and also to those kind of programs that put us together discussing about tourism, the future of the Mediterranean. Today, my idea is to, let's see if it's, no, I think we are still with the other presentation. Meanwhile, the idea today is to talk about transition, to talk about ecological and socio-ecological transition, and to see and to face which are the danger, which are the fallacies, which are the challenges that we have had. And to do so, I will start from an overview about the Mediterranean. We were talking before about how important is tourism in the Mediterranean. We cannot understand the Mediterranean without the tourism. It's the leading region worldwide. And actually, if we think about the Mediterranean, it's a really wide region across religion, different languages. Actually, here along the day, we will see all our decolonial English, my Catalan, Italian English, our Romanian English, our all the differences actually are on this stage every time that we're trying to put together. The languages, of course, is a way to, okay, here we go. Okay, let's go here to the presentation. So the language is actually a great example how we are together, and we try to converge different languages and culture. So today I will start from an overview about tourism in the Mediterranean. Then I will try to be not so academic, but of course use the academia and what we have done in the academia to look at a political ecology perspective when we talk about social ecology, ecological transition. And then see what we have on the table, no? This technocracy governance and those toolkits we have to face transition. So if we start about the tourism in the Mediterranean, we are in the cradle of mass tourism. Actually, mass tourism started here, beginning in the Mediterranean. So we cannot understand this region without that. 22 countries with different culture, with different languages, and Sometimes we talk about how many differences we have in terms of gastronomy, in terms of culture, and it's also important to think about those visitors. For example, we had in 2025. I will describe in a minute, and also how small is the Mediterranean, but at a commercial level, how huge it is in terms, if we compare also with other ocean and with other region. And so regarding those millions, how they are redistributed. Of course, there is an imbalance and really a lot of differences. Of course, those are a known elaboration from the UN dashboard, and of course, there are also some data missing in the UN dashboard. And we can see that there are a lot of differences. France, Spain, Turkey, Italy, of course, they lead the European med tourism. But then there are other places that, of course, are looking to grow. Sometimes we have use, and we have some colleagues from the Western Asia. We have so used to talk about Middle East, but Middle East for who? Middle East is a colonial perspective from the Eurocentric point of view. This is Western Asia, is not Middle East. This is how during the colonial age we have always named the Middle East and the Western Asia. So we need to think about how has been redistributed those fluxes around the Mediterranean. And also how diverse is the tourism that we have in the region. We have, of course, urban icons. Barcelona, we are in one of the urban icons. We have a lot of urban destinations. The city break with the Ryanair revolution begin here in the Mediterranean and in Europe. But of course, we have a lot of archipelago and island that are facing a lot of struggle in terms of climate emergency. Then emerging city. Thessaloniki, Naples, Marseille, around the Mediterranean, we have a lot of emerging cities. Also because what actually tourists want, they want authenticity, a social construction. Authenticity doesn't exist. It's a just social construction. So as much we have those kind of destinations that are touristified, what we want emerging city. We want emerging destination. And on the other hand, of course, we have rural and small area. We have cyclotourism. Here we have, for example, the provincial Barcelona Council has worked a lot on sport, adventure, and also rural and cyclotourism. But how was this narrative shift? When we talk about transition in tourism, well, we can talk about transition. Since the 80s, we were talking about ecotourism. We realized that we needed something different in our context. So we start to talk about ecotourism in the 80s. But then we had the Rio Earth Summit, and we start to talk about sustainable tourism, to adapt this idea of sustainable development to tourism. Then we start to politicize the consumer. So we said, we need a tourist that is responsible with the environment, responsible with the local community. And then we went through all the green certification, through the idea of smart tourism. Everyone wants to live in a smart city and visit a smart destination. But what is actually a smart destination, right? Then we adapt from the agriculture the idea of regenerative. This idea of regeneration comes from the agriculture, to regenerate some land before going and work on those lands. And then, of course, before, and with the over-tourism crisis, before the pandemic, we start to talk about slow tourism, quality tourism. We want less tourists that spend more. But how does affect to local community? We will see it in a while. Then resilience. We were talking about resilience after the pandemic, and now we are talking about transformational tourism, to transform cities and community through tourism. It was a huge vocabulary that have been evolved during these 40, 15 years. But actually, the footprint grew a lot, actually. And what about the Homo Touristico? What about those tourists that are traveling around and down the Mediterranean, around Europe? We had the traditional tourists with the travel agency, asking people down the street. Then we had the social, the first handprint in the social media, through the sharing one. The sharing is together with the 2008 crisis that we had, the sharing economy or platform capitalism. And then we have those kind of proactive consumers. Now with the influencer, for example, you can have a destination, an attraction that is not promoted by the city council. Here we have in Barcelona a couple of really paradoxical examples that have not been promoted by the city council or the provincial Barcelona council. But at some point, with this proaction of those tourists or influencers, they start to boom in the social network. And now we have those temporary residences. These floating residents we have in our city. International students, digital nomads, and the Mediterranean is one of the leading region for lifestyle migrants. We have a lot of lifestyle migrants in our region, in the Mediterranean region. Now, for example, I am leading with UN Tourism a project in Medellin, in Colombia, trying to understand those temporary residents in a city like Medellin, that worldwide is one of the cities that receive most of those temporary residents. What about algorithm governance? This buzzword and buzz concept that now we all talk about. Actually, when we talk about algorithm governance in tourism, there was a great shift from steering to being steered, right? So we are guided, and we thought we are free when we are traveling. But we are not so free as we can imagine. You open your Google map, and then Mr. Google decides which attraction will come and pop up on your Google. There are some accounts that are banned that probably you cannot see, and is a great attraction or not, or probably an attraction that would be worth to visit. The rankings, and who actually own those rankings. So, of course, we have gone from an economy where the commodity was in the center, but now the data are in the center. The data are in the center, and when we talk about the data, of course, this was the tech shift, no? The technology shift that we are experiencing in tourism. So, with this overview, how can we talk about socio-ecological transition? Which is the relation between crisis and tourism, which is the relation between tourism and every time that we have, for example, financial crisis or what we can call polycrisis. And why is it important to talk about polycrisis? It seems that after over-tourism, we have another buzzword, right? Polycrisis. Everyone talks about polycrisis. But why is it important to talk about that? Because we cannot understand how the age of our society, and I am an anthropologist, by the way, and from anthropology, we look at society and the evolution of the human culture. Zoonosis is a key concept to understand how we are evolving. We cannot understand all the crises that we are having without understanding the relation and the interdependence about those crises. The virus spillover and how the animal disease are jumping into human are related with deforestation. And deforestation is related with data center and the technology shift. And of course, when we talk about the health crisis, is related to all those kind of crises. So from the academia, practitioners, public sector, we need to understand and look at how those crises interact between each other. Only like that we can really face the challenges of our era. And let me just take one example regarding crisis in tourism, regarding the water, right? We could take different example. For example, the energy grid, stress. We have had in Barcelona just last year. But let's take the water, because the water is an example of what we share between this co-present between tourists, residents, lifestyle migrants, and all those mobility agents that we have in our destination, in our region. Of course, we share those elements, energy, foods, and resources, and natural resources. But we need to take into account that as much you rely on tourism, of course, you will stress those energy and natural resources. So when we talk about ecological transition, it's really important to take into account how can we share those places and those resources. From the European Commission, and for so long, there was the idea of a better community and a better quality of life would make a better destination. And this, of course, is something that we need to consider and take into account when we plan tourism. For so long, we have promoted destination without planning, of course, is taking into account the stress of those natural resources. So let's see these 6 areas that we need to take into account. Probably here I will go more deep into academic debates. But of course, let's see what we can take from those academics that spend here and here reflecting and discussing about socio-ecological transition. We have seen so far a green capitalism came over, right? With this idea of repainting green the accumulation and in our economic system. Actually, sustainability is a market asset. Uber, Airbnb, Ryanair, they show you which example will be much more friendly with the environment. So it's not something that is outside of the economic system. On the other hand, our wealth here, with all our devices that we have, of course, is based on extractivism. It's based on a colonial dispossession. In Europe, we don't have rare earth, or we don't have lithium, we don't have cobalt, we don't have coltan. So, of course, we need to face, and we don't have so much time, as has been said before. So we need to take, and in Europe and in the Mediterranean region, we need to be aware about that. And then we have seen also from social movement that we have been discussing a lot, from Barcelona as well, this idea of degrowth. But how can we talk about degrowth in the global north? What about all our Western Asian friends, and all about all the African tourists, or Asian or Latin American tourists, and middle class that are ready now to travel around the world, as we have done in our region? So, of course, we need to take into account that. And just transition for whom? And this is related to extractivism and to the governed algorithm. We are facing the most unequal era of our story, of our history. We have never been so unequal. Not even in the feudalism, the beginning of the capitalism. We have never facing a stage of our human evolution with the power in such few hands. So, of course, we need to consider that. And we need to consider the ecological debt. The market and the economy does not give back. We have finite resources. So we need to talk about circular economy. We need to buy inclusive growth. And we need to take into account the ecological debt. And what about patriarchy, that is the base of our economic system? What about the reproductive and care work? Is the base of how we reproduce our wealth in our society. So an ecological transition in tourism need to take into account and consider, for example, the housekeepers and housekeeper workforce in our hotel and hospitality. We need to consider also that. So those are some of the key areas that I think are really important to take into account. Before going, in my last 10 minutes, to the toolkit and the standard toolkit in tourism governance, or what we can call, in this tech shift era, the technocracy governance. During the last 30, 40 years, we have tried in tourism to face transition, from ecotourism to responsible tourism to quality tourism. And we have used different kind of toolkits. From spatiality, let's decentralize, let's decongest. Let's decongest some saturated area that we have in the region. On the other hand, we have used the market, or we have used the idea of consumption with luxury tourism or quality tourism, and putting the value over the volume. But there are some tricky issues here that I want to share with an example for each of these areas, right? Governance. We have used to manage instead govern, and we will see with the case of Dubrovnik in this case. I don't know if there are some colleagues that know the case or they are from there. Or the carbon, the decarbonization. And the community. Sometimes the community is not part of a bottom-up approach, but sometimes it's an attraction, or just part of a participatory decision that are not really participatory rights. So let's see the first example we have had. I know that there are some other Italian colleagues. So we have used a lot of strategy around Europe and the Mediterranean to decentralize and use tourism to repopulate some areas. This was, for example, the case of the PNR Borghi. And of course could be a great strategy. And we have seen also in Catalonia, in Spain, in other regions in the Mediterranean. And the idea here, the goal, is a great goal. Let's try to bring tourism in those areas where we have less population, where we can regenerate the economy and bring more social value in those areas. Now we are, after 40 years of different projects at a different level, unequal and differences between those villages and the first pilot project. And the question is, does this strategy that has a goal, the idea of bringing tourists to those areas, will only end up with a museification or probably only rely on tourism? What does it mean, repopulate? Repopulate, for example, means having social houses strategy and have an economy that is not so seasonal like tourism. Tourism is a great and a really powerful force, but need to complement other economic activity. Tourism, if it's the only economy, can bring what we have seen before, imbalances, growth. If we go to the market and we think about something that we have been so far, and in the Mediterranean talk a lot about deseasonalization. Sometimes when I talk with some Greek friends, said, we don't want, Greek colleagues, we don't want deseasonalization. We like during the winter to go back to our highland, to go back to our life. So deseasonalization in the Mediterranean could be quite different for each one of us. The idea, for example, of the eco tax in the Balearic Island. Could be a great idea to have an eco-tax during the off-season. But does really tackle the issue? Are we use the green levy just to grow all over the year? or can help us to deseasonalize tourism. What we want with that. Regarding the consumption, we will go back to Italy, to another region that now is booming. I don't know if there's someone from Puglia. Puglia is booming, and there is this idea of to put the value over the volume. And some areas that were actually really well known for the historic farmlands now are going through elitization of the tourism with 300, 600, 700 euro per night in Masseria. So are we sure that those kind of policies are not going to promote rural gentrification or displacement in those areas? How can we converge different idea of living and livelihood strategy? The fourth one is interesting, is governance, because sometimes when we talk about smart tourism, when we talk, I have been part with the European Parliament of a study that we have done in 2018 on policy response to over-tourism. And this was in 2018. We were talking about digital monitoring, smart tourism, visitor cap. Here in Barcelona, we have the debate on cruise ships, which kind of cruise ship we want in the city. And of course, those are really effective strategy. But we need to make the difference between governance and management. With the management and with managing, we manage the flux. We manage how many people we want in this room, how we want to sit, why we don't want people sit up there. But with governance, it's something different. Actually, Dubrovnik is a case where people are abandoning the city center, and there is a huge decrease. We could call that probably is experienced the Venice syndrome, Dubrovnik. The fifth one is another tricky one, because I don't know if you know the Environment and Transportation Organization. They have a lot of publications that are really, really interesting on climate emergency. And they were, for example, sharing the idea that a solution that seems a solution, that is the LNG cruise ship, actually, due to the methane slip, on an horizon of 20 years, probably is not so sustainable as we thought. So actually, we are going for the path of decarbonization, but probably it's not the right one. Probably LNG is not the path for the decarbonization. And we know that in the Mediterranean, we have port in the middle of the city. Valencia, Barcelona, Mallorca, Marseille, Naples, all those cities. They have the port in the middle of the city. And sometimes we receive 2-3 cruise ships per day. So, of course, we need to face what seems to be a cruise greenwashing more than decarbonization strategy. Finally, regarding community. And let's take into account the other, on the diversity that we have in the basin. An Italian philosopher, Marco Deramo, was talking about UNESCO. Sometimes with UNESCO, we want to save, but when we give the medicine, we ended up killing the city with what we call the urban side, right? And in the Medina of Fez or Marrakesh, for example, we have seen also another huge problem, the decrease and depopulation. And so what we want when we travel, we want to meet other culture, we want to discover other culture. So it does make sense to use those kind of strategy if we ended up to empty those cities. So those six toolkit and strategy are not wrong itself. What I'm doing as an anthropologist and how I'm doing as a practitioner and professor and researcher, of course, it put on the table and share with you the risk that we have sometimes when we use those toolkits. But those toolkits could be really effective. But of course, here I am to share with you also the dark side of those. So where we go from here, with 3 minutes that I have, a transition does not will be never a transition if it does not redistribute. If we think at the global level, Stephen Gosling, a great researcher from Sweden, with who we were working on the European Parliament report, he was saying that in 2018 and 2019, in just 1 year, the global population that traveled worldwide was just the 4%. The 4% of the global population traveled globally. So we need to talk about inequality also in mobility. And we need to consider the idea of mobility justice. Because what the Eurostat have said in the last couple of years, that actually in 2025, the 27% of the European population, the green one are the Mediterranean countries, cannot afford 1 week holiday. So 1/3 of the European community population. So we need to transform tourism. We need to transitioning through a mobility justice and inclusive growth. But we need also to give to our citizens the opportunity to afford vacation. Otherwise, we will always have in Florence, Barcelona, Bari, Marseille, or all over the European, in Fez, Marrakesh. We will have a problem with that if we cannot afford vacation, but we do receive visitor economy and all the externality of such economy. So just to conclude, what is important, and we have been here in the Mediterranean for millennia, with, as we said at the beginning, with different culture, religion, languages. And the question Ivana actually mentioned at the beginning is not how we afford or not. We cannot imagine a future of the future of the tourism in the Mediterranean without facing those challenges. So what we have already some really good tool. We will talk about the Glasgow Act later. We will have the Barcelona Convention. We have already a good toolkit, but we need to build common knowledge. We don't have to compete between us as country, as institution, because the Mediterranean is the leading tourist sector. We need to work on a more balanced tourism fluxes, but to commit also to share data. For me was really, I have access to the UN dashboard because I'm consulting for the UN, but it's really difficult to take all those data, to have all those data of the Mediterranean basin. So we need to have shared infrastructure. And to align for a fair socio-ecological transition, we need indicators across border, not just thinking a country to another one. And finally, as been mentioned, we have a demographic crisis in the Mediterranean. We are not growing, at least in the northern basin. We need to address housing, and this is all related with tourism. If we want to work in tourism, we need to work together with other secretaries, ministry, and across institutions to address before those inequalities will become irreversible. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Claudio. I'm afraid we don't have time for questions, but you will be able to address them during the coffee break. Thank you for offering us not only a diagnosis of the challenges facing Mediterranean tourism, but also a framework for thinking critically about the transformation ahead. Your intervention reminds us that tourism transition is not only a technical or economic process, it is also a social, territorial, and cultural transition, one that requires to rethink governance, redefine success, and place communities at the center of tourism development. We have now reached our first break of the morning. Coffee and refreshments will be served in the Pati de las Donas, which is located just across the square downstairs. Our staff will be happy to guide you there. And we encourage you to use this opportunity not only to enjoy a short break, of course, but also to connect with colleagues from other regions, projects, and organizations. One of the great strengths of this convention is precisely the diversity of experiences gathered here today. Sorry. Many of the most valuable conversations often happen between sessions, don't forget it. We will resume our session, our convention, sharply at 11:45, 11:45. Thank you very much. Enjoy your coffee break and run for your coffee.